Our first story takes us to San Diego, where Christopher Hayes, once celebrated as a hero, became known for something much darker. Hayes, a former Army veteran, joined the San Diego Police Department and quickly earned a reputation as a top officer. He was even praised for saving a woman from a fire. But behind this respectable image was a man misusing his authority in terrible ways. In December 2013, the first of several accusations surfaced. A woman claimed Hayes had inappropriately touched her during a routine pat-down while on duty. Hayes denied the accusation, saying he was just doing his job. But as more women came forward, 7 in total, their stories were disturbingly similar. Hayes had taken advantage of his position to engage in inappropriate behavior. In court, the prosecution brought each victim to the stand where they bravely shared their experiences. One woman described how Hayes had pulled her over at a bus stop, offered her a ride, and then took her to a secluded area where he touched her inappropriately. Another woman recounted how Hayes drove her to a friend's house and conducted a so-called pat-down that left her feeling violated and helpless. Perhaps the most troubling testimony came from a woman who was arguing with her boyfriend when Hayes arrived. After separating the couple, Hayes insisted on taking the woman home. Once there, he followed her inside and ordered her to lift her shirt, making a highly inappropriate request that left her feeling terrified. Hayes' attorney tried to argue that the women weren't in a clear state of mind, but the judge was not convinced. The evidence was overwhelming, and the victims' stories were consistent. Before sentencing, one of the victims addressed Hayes directly, calling him a disgrace to the uniform. Hayes' wife also took the stand, tearfully defending her husband, but her words had little impact on the outcome. In the end, the judge sentenced Hayes to 1 year in prison. As Hayes was led away in handcuffs, his wife broke down in tears while the victims finally felt a sense of justice. But the damage was done. Hayes' actions had forever stained the badge he once wore with pride. Next, we head to Jackson County, Florida, where this deputy decided that enforcing the law wasn't enough.
This is a case about an abuse of an incredible power, about the abuse of the incredible trust that we all put, and we have to put, in law enforcement in a society.
Wester's crimes were straight out of a nightmare. He was caught planting drugs on innocent people during routine traffic stops, sending them to jail for crimes they didn't commit. Wester's downfall began when his own body cam footage betrayed him. The footage clearly showed Wester planting drugs in the vehicles of unsuspecting motorists. The prosecution used this footage as the cornerstone of their case, playing it repeatedly in the courtroom to ensure the jury understood the severity of Wester's actions. One of the most heartbreaking moments of the trial came when Teresa Odom, one of Wester's victims, took the stand. With tears in her eyes, she described how her life was turned upside down after Wester planted drugs in her car. Wester, still trying to maintain his innocence, took the stand in his own defense. He claimed that the footage was taken out of context and that he was simply doing his job, but the jury wasn't buying it. The evidence was clear. Wester was a dirty cop who had betrayed the trust of the very people he was supposed to protect. The judge didn't mince words during the sentencing. "You took an oath to protect and serve, and instead you chose to destroy lives," he said. Wester was sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in prison. As the sentence was read, Wester showed little emotion, but the weight of his crimes was felt by everyone in the room. For the victims, justice had finally been served, but if you thought this was bad, then you're not prepared for the next. This former Oklahoma City police officer took corruption to a horrifying new level. He didn't just abuse his power, he preyed on vulnerable women, using his badge as a shield for his monstrous actions. Most of his victims were from low-income, predominantly black neighborhoods, and Holtzclaw knew exactly how to exploit their fears. The courtroom was packed during Holtzclaw's trial, with reporters, victims, and members of the public eager to see justice served. The prosecution laid out a pattern of behavior that was as chilling as it was consistent. Holtzclaw targeted women with criminal records, knowing they would be too afraid to speak out. One victim described how Holtzclaw pulled her over, ran a background check, and then attacked her when he discovered she had outstanding warrants. "He made me feel like I was nothing, like I had no choice but to do what he wanted," she testified, her voice trembling. Holtzclaw's defense team tried to discredit the victims, suggesting that their criminal backgrounds made them unreliable witnesses, but the jury wasn't swayed. The prosecution's case was too strong, and the victims' stories were too similar to be dismissed as mere coincidence. When the guilty verdict was read, Holtzclaw broke down in tears, a stark contrast to the cold and detached demeanor he had maintained throughout the trial. The judge, clearly disgusted by Holtzclaw's actions, didn't hold back during sentencing. "You were entrusted with the safety of the community, and you violated that trust in the worst possible way," he said before sentencing Holtzclaw to 263 years in prison. As Holtzclaw was let out of the courtroom, the victims and their families finally felt a sense of closure.
Well, Wolf, tonight, Officer Michael Slager and the North Charleston Police are being sued over another incident, as you mentioned, involving Slager and the use of force. Julius Wilson is the man's name. He and his lawyer suing them for civil rights violations, suing Slager, suing the North Charleston Police. This stems from a traffic stop in North Charleston in August of last year. This is the dash cam video of that traffic stop. Julius Wilson is pulled over by another officer. The dash cam video shows that officer talking to Wilson. The officer goes to his own vehicle, comes back, tells Wilson he's driving with a suspended license and he needs to get out of the car, that he's taking him to jail. Slager, the second guy there, the second policeman there, approaches the scene. Here's what happens next.
All right, well, you do me a favor, step out for me. Just go ahead and step out.
And life prison sentence for former East Point police officer Marcus Eberhardt. After his conviction in 2017, Eberhardt appealed to the Supreme Court. His lawyers argued there was just not enough evidence. The Supreme Court disagreed. In 2014, 24-year-old Gregory Towns Jr. died after officers Eberhardt and Howard Weems tased him repeatedly following a domestic abuse call.
In one of the most tragic cases of police misconduct, officers Marcus Eberhardt and Howard Williams from Georgia were charged with the death of Gregory Towns Jr., who was involved in a domestic dispute and had tried to flee from the officers when they arrived. But what happened next was nothing short of a nightmare. Towns, exhausted and in handcuffs, posed no threat to the officers, yet Eberhardt and Williams decided to use their tasers on him. Eberhardt tased him 10 times and Williams tased him 3 times. Towns died shortly after from the excessive force used against him. In the courtroom, the defense tried to argue that Towns' death was due to his medical condition, not the tasers. But the prosecution wasn't having it. They brought in paramedics and neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath, all of whom testified that Towns was compliant and in distress, and that there was no reason for the officers to use such force. The trial was emotionally charged, with Towns' family present in the courtroom, watching as the details of his final moments were laid bare. The most poignant moment came when Towns' girlfriend, Aisha Smith, took the stand. Holding their 3-year-old son's hand, she tearfully told the court how she regretted making the 911 call that led to Towns' death. "I thought I was helping him by calling the police, but instead, I sent him to his death," she said, her voice breaking. After a day of deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict. Eberhardt was found guilty on all counts, including murder, while Williams was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The judge, before sentencing Eberhardt to life in prison and Williams to 5 years, addressed the courtroom. "Your actions have shaken this community to its core. The law must be upheld and justice must be served." As the officers were led away, the sense of loss in the courtroom was palpable. Gregory Towns Jr. would never come back, but his family could take some solace in the fact that those responsible for his death were held accountable. Sheriff Charlie Reeder of Pike County, Ohio, was once hailed as a hero for his role in leading the investigation into the notorious Roden family massacre. But behind the scenes, Reeder was hiding a dark secret. He had a gambling addiction that led him to steal from the very people he was sworn to protect. Reeder's courtroom proceedings were nothing short of dramatic. He tried to portray himself as a modern-day Robin Hood, claiming that he only took money from drug dealers to help the community. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They presented evidence showing that Reeder had tampered with evidence, misused funds, and even tried to cover up his crimes by altering records. The most damning testimony came from Reeder's own deputies, who revealed the extent of his corruption. One deputy described how Reeder had pressured him to stay silent about the missing funds, while another testified that Reeder had used the stolen money to feed his gambling habit. Reeder, in a desperate attempt to gain leniency, gave a tearful and lengthy plea to the court. He admitted to his gambling problem, but tried to justify his actions by claiming that he'd used the stolen money for good causes in the community. But the judge wasn't convinced. "You tarnished the badge and betrayed the trust of your community," she said before sentencing Reeder to 3 years in prison. As Reeder was let out of the courtroom, his family wept. and the once respected sheriff was now just another corrupt cop who thought he was above the law. The community he had once served could only watch as their fallen hero was taken away in disgrace. Officer Sean Corder from Bloomfield, New Jersey thought he could get away with falsifying reports and covering up his own misconduct. But when dashcam footage surfaced that contradicted his story, Corder found himself in the hot seat. Corder's downfall began with a traffic stop involving Marcus Jeter, who was falsely accused of resisting arrest and attempting to disarm an officer. Corder and his team wrote fake police reports to back up these charges, hoping to bury the truth. But when the dashcam footage was discovered, it revealed a very different story. Jeter had complied with the officers, and it was Corder who had escalated the situation unnecessarily. In the courtroom, the prosecution played the dashcam footage repeatedly, making it clear that Corder had lied in his reports. The footage showed Jeter's compliance and the excessive force used by Corder and his team. Jeter himself was present in the courtroom, visibly emotional as he watched the evidence that would finally clear his name. Corder took the stand in his own defense, but the testimony did little to sway the jury. He tried to argue that the footage didn't capture the full context of the situation, but the prosecution quickly dismantled his claims. The most fatal moment came when the prosecutor asked Corder, "Do you stand by your report, knowing what we've seen in this video?" Corder's hesitation spoke volumes. The judge, before delivering the sentence, made it clear that Corder's actions had severely damaged public trust in law enforcement. "You were entrusted with upholding the law, yet you chose to break it to protect yourself," the judge stated. Corder was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, and as he was led away, there was a sense of justice being restored. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content that uncovers the truth behind the headlines.